Ramanuja is more careful in that sense. He focuses on the disagreement with Sankhya only on that most abstract level of Prakrti and Purusha, Chetana and Prakrti. And that comes out again in another point in the discussion, 2-45. There, Vipratished there Ramanuja is again quite different, entirely different from Shankara. And Ramanuja says very clearly, Sharira ke, so in the Brahma Sutra, cha, Sankyokta Tattvanam Abrahmatmaka ta matram nirakartam na svarupam. So he is ready to accept at the end quite a lot of Sankhya, accept the idea or the position that these evolutes of Sankhya would not have the nature of Brahma. So, in other words, once you attribute to them the nature of Brahman, of having Brahma as Atman, then they can be accepted. So, which also matches with the statements in the Mahabharata, in Pancharatra text. So, Ramanuja takes all these into account, and Bhagavad Gita, where Yoga and Sankhya are much honored. So, in that sense, Ramanuja is ready to accept much more from Sankhya, but he focuses on the disagreement on that level of the beginning of the evolutes. I will quickly show that again to make it clear. So, for Ramanuja, really the problem is here, and the acceptance of a Prakrti Pradhana, which is without Chetana, and separate the Purusha, which is pure Chetana, and then from here the evolutes, including at the end Akasha and the earth, water, fire, air in the other sequence. For Ramanuja, the problem is only here, and all these other things can be accepted, and in fact they are also integrated in Pancharatra texts, which he accepts and follows. But in this commentary of Shankara, although he says that it is said that Shankara has written a commentary on Yoga Sutra first, and later on he became Vedanta. But at this moment in the Shankara Bhashya on Brahma Sutra, he's very radical in rejecting. That is exactly what I should not have done. So there he is. Shankara really rejects everything, at least in his words. And if something comes back that is independently derived from Shruti, for instance, the Akasha, Vyat, the air, the fire, the water and earth. So Brahma Sutra and Shankara want to derive that separately in their own way from Shruti. But Ramanuja is much more ready to accept also Sankhya and also Veda, also yoga, as long as yoga, in that same passage which I quoted, 2-45, he also said, it's a long passage by Ramanuja, where he says that the yoga practice taught by, in the yoga system, the yoga smriti, that is all accepted as long as we see it as a way of approaching Brahma or of adoring Brahma. So in that sense, we can say that Ramanuja was accepting the Yoga Sutra, and probably also that sutra which I quoted in the beginning, this which I referred to in the beginning, Tatsanidhau, Ahimsa Pratisthayam, Tatsanidhau, Vaira Tyagaha. I'm proceeding to the then the other theme which I mentioned, so where Shankara and Ramanuja should be investigated with, in relationship to the earlier Sankhya, which was an ascetic system with, I mentioned this Kapila Sannyasa Vidhi from Baudhayana Gurya Sutra. So we have the theme of ahimsa and ahimsa, which is especially coming to the front in Brahma Sutra 3.1.25. Ashuddham iti chen na shabdat. And Shankara, Ramanuja, and even Madhva, they interpret it as a defense of killing, of violence within a Vedic ritual on account of scriptural authority. And Madhva, even although he's famous for in practice doing this Pishta Pashu sacrifice, Pishta Pashu Vedic ritual, nevertheless, in his commentary on 3.1.25, as far as I have seen it in the edition and as far as it is transmitted, he simply defends that killing in the sacrifice is quite acceptable. And perhaps they did it only to avoid the criticism of Brahmins, and it was maybe more a theoretical question than one with very much consequence in practice, practical life. So one author comes with, with regard to that sutra, one author comes with a remarkable explanation of that sutra, quite exceptional from the other ones. And that is the Vaishnava theologian and devotee of Krishna Vallabhacharya. According to him, Brahma Sutra 3.1.25 rejects quite a different objection than assumed by Shankara and others. So the objection, according to Vallabhacharya, would be that food, like rice, would be impure if souls of the deceased were to be associated with it. And the answer would be that the sacred texts speak of an offering of food in the fire, and on account of this, food becomes pure. This seems to be very different, but in fact, if we see the whole context of the Pada, again we see that in fact Vallabha's interpretation fits perhaps even better than the one proposed by Shankara and Ramanuja. Ramanuja following probably, or responding and elaborating on Shankara. So more of that is in that study already published. So I will conclude here this very brief overview of research, partly already done and partly in progress. So there is the Randall Collins Sociology of Philosophies, who said that the second millennium Common Era was a time when philosophy in India gradually dried up. However, from our brief overview, it is evident that Shankara and Ramanuja were not only religious leaders and in their time and context religious reformers, they were also original philosophers with a broad outlook who lived and radiated their own philosophy. This comes back to the radiation of peace, which I mentioned in the beginning, and we don't know about Ramanuja. We know that he also accepted yoga, the Yoga Smriti, the Yoga Sutra, but I don't know whether he wrote any explicit comment on that specific sutra. So especially Ramanuja was eager not only to refute the earlier Sankhya system on some central points, but also to acknowledge the value of a whole Sankhya network of notions that had already been integrated and assimilated in several philosophical and religious systems, and that is found in passages in the Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, and the Pancharatra texts quoted by him. So thank you for your attention, and any questions, remarks, I will be happy to try to reply.
Please ask questions, and I mean, let's not have speeches from the audience. Please just ask the questions. Professor Huben will reply.
I just have a brief just a couple of brief comments. One on the rejection of Sankhya model. of Jiva is by Ramanuja, especially on the purpose. If you assume that Jiva is only a passive observer of events, then that goes flat against the notion of free will of Jiva as well. And that's one of the main criticisms of against Sankhya philosophy. Other thing that I want to comment on as a whole to the scholars of Indian philosophy in general is that the most abused word there is consciousness. And I have seen 1,000 definition of consciousness, the word consciousness, and especially the word pure consciousness. So unless we really accept a basic tenet of what the definition is, then everything becomes very confusing. So this is just my general comment to scholarship.
So I only refer to Purusha according to the Sankhya system. So yeah. So but yeah, that's. Thank you for your comment.
So you talked about actually Sankhya starting as a rational, critical element and things like that. But from how do we define rational and logic here? Because if you look at Indian philosophy, emotions are considered part of the cognitive sphere of rationality and logic. Say, for example, in bhakti and preeti and all these kind of things. Whereas in the Western spheres, largely speaking, I mean, there might be exceptions. Largely speaking, these are actually in the rational and logical world philosophy point of view, it is completely almost rejected. And similarly, stagnation and progress. What is progress is for industrialist would be regressive for an environmentalist. So how do you define all these things? It's just like so broad and also, I mean, completely cultural point of view, I mean, conflicting also at times.
So the point of rationality, I have published 2 papers on rationality in Sankhya. In '99 is one published and one is in 2001, and I can send you the PDF if you're interested. So, but we see the behavior, let's say, of Sankhya scholars in Mahabharata. We see their way of discussing, and we see that they among the 3 pramanas which almost every school accepts, that is pratyaksha, anumana and shabda. Sankhya is quite unique in placing anumana first, so the argument derivation is placed explicitly first. So in that sense, I have called the ancient Sankhya as a rational movement, because once you put rationality or anumana first, you can also not insist that all your followers should follow a doctrinal system. So in fact, there's a contradiction between a doctrinal system and placing really anumana first. So the Shashti Tantra in my studies appears rather as a system of 60 topics of analysis, of discussion, which is not, it is not the doctrinal system which came out much later. Like we all know that the Sankhya Sutra is a very late text. But if we see how Sankhya appears in Mahabharata, for instance, every Sankhya teacher has a slightly different view or different ideas, and which was disturbing quite a lot to scholars like Frauwallner. But my different view on this problem of scholars like Frauwallner is that there was no fixed system. That was just the result of placing anumana first, that there cannot be a very fixed doctrinal system which everyone can blindly follow. In that case, tradition should be first, and already we have Mimamsa, where tradition, Vedic tradition is first, to such extent that they say that the Veda has to be aparusheya, etc. So these things we don't find in Sankhya. And in Mahabharata also we see suddenly a sage, Kapila, we don't know whether it is the Kapila or a Kapila, but who starts to discuss with someone who wants to sacrifice a cow, and he starts to really to engage him in I would say a rational discussion. So I use rational not in any modern well-defined sense, but in an open-minded broad definition, which we should not only base on Western philosophy, but we should learn also from what has been happening in Indian philosophy, and there we have schools which seem to me fitting to a very broad definition of rational approach. They were criticizing, without giving up completely Vedas, they were still criticizing certain practices. They said, yeah, it's true that the Vedas prescribe violence, but why should you do that sacrifice? You can also decide not to do it. So in that sense, I have called Sankhya a rational movement, for which we find the traces in the Mahabharata, and that is why we cannot, doctrinally, we cannot define the pre-Karika Sankhya. So this is some of my use of modern terms is perhaps provocative, because I think in the past such problems were also there. Only we can either decide not to translate and we say only Anumana, they placed Anumana first, or we can decide that they were also doing something similar like rational discussion.
Shankara and Ramanuja seem to be very, like they are having same approach almost, because Shankara in Rachana Anubhavatte he Nanumanam, Anumanam means Samkhya. The another synonym for Anumanam is Samkhya according to Shankara. And he all through that 11 sutras, he is only telling that unless the Ishvara is accepted, your system cannot work with the like insentient matter. So where is the difference between them? What is the difference that you are invoking?
Yes, so they are quite parallel, and you feel also, means it is well known historically that Ramanuja was more or less following up on Shankara and at some points differing, but at the other points which I mentioned, you see suddenly they are quite different. For instance, in that 3, 2, 1, 2, this Itaresham Chanupalabde, there it's a quite different interpretation by Shankara and Ramanuja. So a few places I identified where they are very different, and especially this Vipratished there Ramanuja suddenly is very generously accepting almost everything of Sankhya, as long as they accept that Brahmatmakatva. And so either the neutral term Brahma or the personal Ishvara. So in fact, that was one of my between we met and you invited me in July, I have been searching for the passages where they differ, and so several, and where they differ, it's very interesting and quite divergent. That Shankara is much more radical in really throwing away all Sankhya, at least in theory, but Ramanuja is apart from that problem at the top of the whole tree, the generative tree. Yes, that is one thing, but I also think that because he was accepting Pancharatra and it is also much more harmonious with Gita, Bhagavad Gita. Of course, Shankara also commented on Bhagavad Gita, but I think at that point the commentary on Sri Bhashya and the commentary by Ramanuja on Bhagavad Gita is much more harmonious and continuous, whereas for Shankara the jump from commenting on Brahma Sutra and on Bhagavad Gita seems to be bigger, or the gap perhaps.
Thank you very much. I think we can give him a very big hand. It's a fascinating subject, and there's so much to Samkhya because it was very much a part of Ramanuja's philosophy. Now our next speaker is Shri Lakshmi Tatachar, a recipient of the award of the President of India for proficiency in Sanskrit. He is the president of the Samskriti Foundation, Mysore, Chief Patron and the Dean and Chairman of Research, Sri Ramanuja Vishwa Vidya Pratishthan, Indian Institute of Transdisciplinary Research in the Philosophy of Sri Ramanuja in Melkote. A scholar specializing in many Shastras, he was the founding director of the Sanskrit Academy, Melkote, and he has a large number of publications to his credit.
यो नित्यमच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मव्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये न चेद्रामानुजेत्येषा चतुरा चतुरक्षरी कामवस्थां प्रपद्यन्ते जन्तवो हन्तमादृशः पुण्यां भोजविकासाय पापध्वान्तक्षयाय च श्रीमानाविरभूद्भूमौ रामानुजदिवाकरः या वृत्तिर्मनसि मनसा जायतां संस्मृतिस्ते यो यो जल्पः स भवतु विभो नाम संकीर्तनन्ते या चेष्टा वपुषि भगवन् सा भवेद्वन्दनन्ते सर्वं भूयाद्वरवरमुने सम्यगाराधनन्ते. My humble pranams to everybody. I am extremely thankful to Dr. Mishra for giving me an opportunity to present the views of Ramanuja with regard to mind and body in this very interesting conference. And my feeling is Ramanuja has taken so many things from so many systems of philosophy. Very interesting thing about Ramanuja, which is stated in many of the texts, is sati badhake tyajyate asati badhake upadiyate. If it is contradictory to the philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, it will be neglected. It will not be taken. On the other hand, if it is supporting to the Vishishtadvaitic viewpoint, it will be accepted. Probably this should be the attitude of each and every philosopher. He cannot have his own separate philosophy without taking anything from other systems of philosophy. So in that way, Ramanuja has got a holistic view with regard to everything. Whatever is acceptable, definitely he will accept. In fact, my professor used to tell me, Ramanuja has taken so much from Shankara's philosophy also. If you study Shankara Bhashya and later Ramanuja Bhashya, in many places where Shankara has elaborated, Ramanuja summarizes that information because it is already available there, it need not be explained again, if it is not contradictory to his stand. So from that point of view, he has taken so much from Sankhya, so much from Nyaya Vaisheshika philosophy. That's why Vedanta Deshika wrote a book called Nyaya Parishuddhi. Because in Nyaya Parishuddhi, he has taken so much of information from Nyaya, but at the same time, minor changes he has made, modifications he has made. That's why Vedanta Deshika had to write a book called Nyaya Parishuddhi. Nyaya is acceptable to us, but at the same time, with some purification. So, from that point of view, I want to say a few things about mind-body conflict, how it is resolved by Ramanuja, and what is his contribution to this particular field. Probably, if you go to any text in Vishishtadvaita philosophy, probably it starts with mind-body conflict itself. Many a times, the problem is we cannot distinguish in ourselves the difference between the mind and body. Most of the people think the body itself is the soul.